Tonight, true believer no more. David O'Byrne quits the Labor Party to stand as an independent. Also tonight, more US strikes hit Houthi-linked targets, this time with the support of Australia. Celebrated Indigenous leader Dr Lawidja O'Donoghue dies aged 91. And advocates for Tasmanian children with arthritis call for better services. Good evening and welcome to ABC News Sunday. I'm Alexandra Alvaro. Exiled former Labor leader David O'Byrne has quit the Labor Party, announcing he'll run as an independent at the next state election. The move comes as another possible sign that Tasmanians could be headed to the polls early, but there's still a wait to see whether the two former Liberal backbenchers, now independents, can come to an agreement with the Premier to keep his government alive a while longer. State political reporter Lucy McDonald has the story.
He's been a Labor member for 30 years.
Representing people and giving them a voice.
Now that time has come to an end.
So I can announce today that I'll be running as an independent candidate at the next state election.
David O'Byrne was elected to Parliament in 2010 and became Labor leader in 2021 after Rebecca White's second election loss. But his ascension was short-lived, stepping down after he was accused of sexually harassing a junior staffer a decade earlier. An internal investigation found his behaviour was inappropriate and wrong, but didn't breach Labor's policy. Then he was kicked out of the parliamentary party. Mr O'Byrne failed to gain pre-selection in December, meaning he couldn't run as a Labor candidate in the next election. After that, he had two choices: quit the party or quit politics. He's chosen the former, even if it means taking away votes from the movement he says he still loves.
I'm not predicting where my votes will come from. All I'm saying is that I'm an independent member. I'm very keen to represent you in the state parliament for the seat of Franklin.
And he's not the only one preparing to go to the polls early.
Yeah, we're ready for an early election.
Labor's Josh Willey, who's hoping to make his jump into the lower house, had just one response when asked about Mr O'Byrne.
If you are sick of this government, the chaos that they are presiding over, you need to vote Labor. You need to vote for the alternative government.
Bit closer, Barry.
The Liberals have also been spotted door-knocking, and they're relishing any opportunity to talk about Labor losing a high-profile party member.
Rebecca White, as leader for the Labor Party, promised that she would unite the party, and she's clearly failed spectacularly. They are hopelessly divided.
While it's still unclear whether the state is actually heading for an early election, one thing's for sure: it'll be a 35-seat parliament. That makes it easier for independents like Mr O'Byrne and harder for the major parties to get a majority. So Mr O'Byrne might just find himself with a different kind of power. Lucy McDonald, ABC News.
In a second day of major attacks in the Middle East, the US and Britain have launched dozens of strikes on Iran-linked targets in Yemen. The strikes had the support of Australia, alongside other countries like Bahrain, Canada and New Zealand. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese joined Britain in saying the attacks are not an escalation.
British and US forces strike 36 Houthi targets in Yemen. It's the second day of US-led operations retaliating against the deadly attack by Iran-backed militias on American troops last week. British warplanes leaving from Cyprus, US aircraft carriers deployed to the region, flying high-stakes missions and firing cruise missiles.
For both stations.
And bomber units from Texas, whose commander says they can engage in any operation anywhere on the globe. The strikes have the support of several countries, including Australia, which officials said included intelligence and assistance with logistics.
We want to see the area settle down. We're working with our allies to play a role there.
These are the Houthi fighters they're trying to stop. The Allied strikes hit deeply buried weapons storage facilities, as well as missile and air defence systems the Iran-backed militia are using against international ships in the Red Sea. Before the strikes, the militants released this video of training, attacking cars and practicing kidnapping of people pretending to be foreign soldiers.
Iran's proxies have played with fire for months and years, and it's now burning them.
The US insists the latest attacks are part of an existing operation to degrade the capabilities of the Houthis. But as hostilities intensify, it's clear what's actually happening here in the Middle East. This is an escalating war between the US and the tentacles of Iran. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
For the people of Yemen, conflict is not new. Nearly a decade of civil war has already devastated much of the nation, plunging it into what the United Nations calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Yemenis now fear another war looms.
For most of his life, Fuad El-Jadi has walked to class each morning, knowing he may not return home.
My school was shelled, and I had to stop going for a while. As a child, I was afraid our house would be hit. I was constantly in fear.
After nearly a decade of civil war in Yemen, fighting between Houthi rebels and government forces was put on hold in 2022 in a UN-brokered truce. That truce has held longer than expected, allowing 13-year-old Fuad to focus on what matters.
We have big dreams. We want to become doctors and engineers.
Now his country faces another war against a powerful enemy threatening to undo the fragile peace. American airstrikes on Houthi rebel targets in Yemen have drawn Washington and some Western allies, including Australia, into an expanding conflict in the Middle East. Residents now worry a dark new chapter is beginning. Locals are stockpiling fuel in anticipation of a war with the West, while business owners are bracing for further economic decline.
The news is bad and a war is looming. We worry we'll be forced to shut the factory.
In Shima Ibrahim's chocolate shop, years of conflict forced her to let go of staff, while black market supplies have become unaffordable.
We faced the last war bravely, then we're ready for a tough new war.
For the generation that's known nothing but, surviving is the only option.
Even if there was another war on Yemen, we will not surrender. I will carry on.
Tom Joyner, ABC News.
Anthony Albanese says he's an honest person as he defends a broken promise and sells his tax cut changes to the public and Parliament. Federal Parliament returns this week with the tax cuts top of the agenda. Here's political reporter Tom Lowry.
Questions of character.
I'm asking whether your word is still your bond.
David, I'm an honest person.
As the Prime Minister sells a tax turnaround.
Low and middle income Australians are under pressure. What I can't do as Prime Minister of Australia is to wring my hands and say, if only there was something I could do about it.
Internal polling is telling Labor the public broadly likes its Stage 3 tax changes. The question is what voters make of a broken promise.
Circumstances have changed. And what we've done is respond to the changed economic circumstances.
Labor still hasn't fixed the unfairness in the Stage 3 tax cuts.
But first, the government has to convince the Greens or the Coalition.
We'll be fighting for more for low and middle income earners when this comes to Parliament.
The bill will land in Parliament on Wednesday, but has been made public today, ahead of party room meetings tomorrow and Tuesday. Some in coalition ranks want to take a stand.
We should stick with what Australians have been promised, what the Labor Party voted for, what the Liberal Party voted for, what the Australian people voted for, which were the Stage 3 tax cuts.
Others sounding more open-minded.
We'll be pragmatic, we'll discuss the details of that, but we want to put as much back in people's pockets as we can.
Peter Dutton has already dropped hints the Coalition won't look to block this legislation. It may opt to vote these changes through and take its own tweaks to the next election. The government is confident it's starting the parliamentary year on the right note, and it hopes that might carry through to a looming by-election. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
Tasmanian paramedics have been given the ability to drop off patients with minor ailments directly into emergency department waiting rooms. Health Minister Guy Barnett announced the measure today, which is aimed at reducing the time that ambulances spend ramped at hospitals. Previously, paramedics had to wait for their patient to be formally accepted by the hospital. Doctors recently told a ramping inquiry that waiting rooms are already overwhelmed and that patients with serious illnesses are waiting long periods for beds on wards. But Ambulance Tasmania is confident the new measure will help to free up paramedics to respond to emergencies.
This pathway is safe. It continues to ensure high quality, and we're able to leave those patients in the waiting room where they will be seen by nurses and doctors at the hospital in the fullness of time, whilst paramedics can respond to other emergencies in the community.
The federal government is finally set to introduce rules requiring car companies to supply more fuel-efficient new vehicles to Australia. Australia has been an outlier on introducing standards, lagging well behind countries like China, the US and New Zealand.
These shiny new electric cars are getting ready to hit the streets, and the government wants more Australians to get behind the wheel.
85% of cars sold around the world are sold under fuel efficiency standards, and it's way beyond time that Australia catches up.
New rules would require car companies to supply more fuel-efficient vehicles, with targets set on the average emissions per kilometre for new cars sold, with fines for non-compliance. The government says it would lead to savings of up to $1,000 every year in fuel costs.
Australians are paying more at the bowser than they should compared to people in other countries because they're using more petrol and diesel.
Car companies have been very clear to us that the latest and best vehicles that they create are often not brought to Australia at all or are brought here years later, specifically because we haven't had these standards in place.
The US has had emissions standards since the 1970s, but change in Australia has been a long time coming.
We are going to stand by our tradies and we are going to save their utes.
The opposition says fuel efficiency standards could make some vehicles unaffordable.
We are going to hear all sorts of nonsense from the opposition, from a range of other stakeholders about this. We're going to hear that, utes are banned. That is not true.
The peak body for car manufacturers says current technology is limited.
And my greatest concern without doing the analysis is around utes, especially 4x4 utes and large SUVs.
The Climate Council says Australia has a long way to go to catch up with the rest of the world.
It would be great to have had it done, 20 years ago, but here we are and it's good to have it done now.
But even with legislation going through Parliament this year, the changes would not come into effect until 2025. Sasha Payne, ABC News.
Australia has lost one of its most celebrated Indigenous leaders, with Dr Lowidja O'Donoghue dying aged 91. The former Australian of the Year spent her life fighting for the rights of First Nations people, spending decades in senior Aboriginal community leadership positions. Dr O'Donoghue's family has given permission for her name and image to be used.
Even after leaving public life, Dr Lowidja O'Donoghue continued to pass on her knowledge and fight for reconciliation.
We were stolen, but we need to move on.
Born in remote South Australia to an Aboriginal mother and a pastoralist father, Dr O'Donoghue and her two elder sisters were taken from her parents when she was just 2. She was trained to be a domestic worker.
I feel angry about the policy that removed us and also took away our culture, took away our language and took away our families.
30 years went by before she saw her mother Lily again.
And what I saw was a woman who had been undone.
Dr O'Donoghue put her efforts into improving the health of her people, fighting discrimination to become the first Aboriginal nurse in South Australia. She joined the public service and spent her career advocating for Aboriginal rights and welfare, and became the first Australian Aboriginal person to address the UN General Assembly.
That the Australian Constitution be changed to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the continent's original inhabitants.
We are a nation that knows itself
now better than at any time in the past is a lot to do with Dr. O'Donoghue.
But Dr. O'Donoghue can best be described by her family, who said we adored and admired her when we were young and have grown up full of never-ending pride as she became one of the most respected and influential Aboriginal leaders this country has ever known. Former Senator and Elder Pat Dodson said hers was a strong voice and her intelligent navigation for First Nations people's rightful place in a resistant society resulted in many of the privileges we enjoy today. And from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Dr. O'Donoghue walked tall, and her example and inspiration made us all walk taller. A remarkable life to be honoured by the South Australian Government.
There will be an offer of a state funeral to her family.
An appropriate celebration of the life of a First Nations pioneer.
Juvenile arthritis is one of the most common chronic diseases affecting Australian children and is a painful and potentially disabling condition. Despite its prevalence, Tasmania is the only state in the country without a permanent paediatric rheumatologist, forcing some families to travel interstate for treatment.
Oh, I didn't know what arthritis was or what they were talking about. But now that I know what it is, I wish I was pain-free and felt normal again.
Harry Danock was just 10 years old when he was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis.
Well, I haven't really told anybody yet. I've just told my teacher and my karate sensei. I haven't even told my grandparents yet because I don't really feel ready to tell people.
Harry had always been active growing up, obsessed with sport including running, swimming and karate. So when he started struggling with simple tasks like holding a knife or using a pen at school, his parents knew something wasn't right.
So it was really a turning point when we realised that we needed to get this looked into because we simply couldn't hug him anymore. You'd go to give him a bedtime hug and he said it hurt too much. I brought arthritis here today because he helps me a lot.
It took more than 8 months for Harry to be diagnosed. While there are treatments available, there's no cure.
Harry's pain or discomfort, depending on the day, is his normal now. He's always fatigued, but just as the physical condition affects him, there's certainly a huge mental impact.
Juvenile arthritis is a chronic, painful autoimmune disease that affects between 6,000 and 10,000 Australian children.
People do think it's a rare disease, but it's actually not rare at all. It's quite common because that's about the same prevalence as diabetes in the same age group.
Life with juvenile arthritis can mean dozens of doctor or specialist appointments every year. Despite around 120 children having the disease in Tasmania, there's no permanent paediatric rheumatologist. A small percentage is seen by an adult rheumatologist, others are forced to travel to Melbourne.
The problem with that, of course, is that in between visits, when the child has an acute episode, something goes wrong, there's no access to acute care.
I've always wanted to be a spaceman.
Parents have joined forces with the Juvenile Arthritis Foundation Australia to urge the state government to establish paediatric rheumatology services. Health Minister Guy Barnett says the government is considering paediatric subspecialties as part of this year's service planning activities, including paediatric rheumatology. Liz Gwynn, ABC News.
Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan and his wife Bushra have been sentenced to 7 years in prison after a court ruled their 2018 marriage broke the law. It's the third ruling against the former cricket star this week, and just days before national elections that he's been banned from contesting.
He's the cricket great turned popular Prime Minister who's already in jail, and now Imran Khan's marriage has landed him and his wife a further 7 years behind bars. A Pakistan court ruled Bushra Khan did not complete the waiting period mandated by Islam after divorcing her previous husband before marrying Imran Khan 5 years ago.
We were not allowed to produce our own evidence in our defense, and that is absolutely violation of the fundamental rights that were guaranteed by the Constitution.
This latest ruling is on top of a 14-year sentence for the couple, handed down a few days ago for illegally selling state gifts, and an extra 10 years for Imran Khan for leaking state secrets. Supporters say the charges are trumped up to stop Imran Khan from ever running for office again.
These all are political motivated cases just to sabotage the elections of 8 February.
Thursday's national elections are being hotly contested, with the son of former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto vying for the top job, as well as another former leader, Nawaz Sharif, who has served jail time for corruption. Imran Khan's party, the PTI, is now forced to field its candidates as independents.
For the first time in the history of Pakistan, the entire leadership of a political party is currently either in jail or hiding.
The Khans have both denied any wrongdoing. The next step, a High Court appeal. Meghna Bali, ABC News.
An Aboriginal family claims a major insurer slugged their pensioner father with excessive premiums for his asbestos cottage in outback WA. The last annual bill that 88-year-old Leonard O'Meara paid before he died was $10,000, despite the property being worth very little. National Consumer Affairs reporter Michael Atkin has this special report which uses Mr O'Meara's name and image with the permission of his family.
Leonard O'Meara's home in Derby in WA's Kimberley region is modest but full of heart and history.
Mum and Dad were so proud. They were probably the first Aboriginal people in town to buy their own house. Look at this photo here of Mum and Dad in the wedding.
Oh, that's beautiful, eh?
In 2009, the pensioner was sold a home insurance policy when he visited the local branch of ANZ Bank. The policy was underwritten by QBE and initially an ANZ subsidiary.
Insurance was just a natural part of home ownership, and he paid his premiums every year.
Dad's bedroom.
His daughters discovered just how much when the 88-year-old asked for help. His premium had jumped to $9,500, more than double the average for northwestern Australia.
All has to be redone. I actually thought it was a mistake.
And when I saw that, I was absolutely gobsmacked. I couldn't believe it.
Over more than a decade, the Jaru man diligently paid $54,000. Since 2016, the policy's cost almost quadrupled.
So this veranda here, how it's all popped up.
How are you, Maureen? Financial counsellor Alan Gray is helping the family seek a refund and compensation.
Thank you.
Mr Gray has obtained an alternative quote with another insurer for $2,850 a year.
And you know, the funny thing is...
He questions if his client was charged excessive premiums, known as a loyalty tax, as a long-term customer who wasn't shopping around.
This would be the worst insurance rip-off I've ever encountered. I'm absolutely certain that Leonard paid a loyalty tax to QBE.
Mr Gray recorded this short video with Leonard O'Meara last September, shortly before his death. He claims the bank pressured him to take out the insurance.
They stated that I had to pay that insurance. Well, I didn't want to argue with it because the house was very important to me, so I paid it.
His family is demanding answers about why the insurance policy was so expensive when the house is worth so little. A recent valuation estimated it was worth no more than $175,000, mainly for the land.
How do they charge an aged pensioner this amount of premiums for a home that we don't even know the value of?
QBE denies it ripped off Mr O'Meara, saying his premiums reflected the risks and benefits of the policy, which was for full replacement. and that rebuilding would be more expensive to meet current standards. ANZ would not comment on Leonard's case, but insists it gives clear advice to customers about insurance products, taking into account their financial situations. Leonard's experience points to a concerning national trend. Rising premiums are pushing more households to go uninsured or into financial stress as they struggle to afford cover.
1 in 8 households in Australia face insurance premiums that is more than a month of their income. That's about 1.24 million households.
Actuary Sharanjit Padam says you can save as much as 50% by shopping around.
There is likely to be a better deal out there for you.
How much will that...
Alan Gray and the family are calling on corporate regulator ASIC to investigate. While the recent loss of Leonard O'Meara remains raw, his family is determined to pursue his alleged mistreatment.
I think they took advantage of my dad because of his age, his vulnerability, his loyalty. We feel so grieved and so hurt by what they've done to Dad that we're definitely going to continue this fight with them.
More details on a $130 million upgrade of Launceston's York Park have been released. The work is being jointly funded by the federal and state governments. There'll be 2 new stands, upgraded match day facilities and new lighting for the stadium. Construction is set to begin later this year, with the redevelopment expected to be finished by the end of 2027. The Tasmanian Jack Jumpers have strengthened their finals prospects with a convincing 109-86 victory of the Adelaide 36ers, their highest ever score. The Jack Jumpers were dominant for most of the game with a 12-point lead at half-time. It was a must-win for Adelaide. Import Trey Kell caught fire early for the visitors with 29 points and 10 rebounds for the game. All eyes were on Jack Jumper big man Will Magnay after copping an elbow to the ribs in a game earlier this week. Magnay persevered through his injury, though his frustration was obvious after being dealt another hit late in the first half. The win confirms the Jack Jumpers' 3rd position on the NBL ladder. More than 800 people have taken part in the 2nd Ironman event to be held in Tasmania. It started with a swim in the River Derwent, followed by a 90-kilometre cycle through Hobart's northern suburbs and finished with a half marathon. Western Australia's Nick Thompson took out first place. Tassie's own Cameron Worth made the podium in 3rd after dealing with a flat tyre on his bike. And in the women's division, the USA's Chelsea Sodaro took first place. To the weather, and Pat Dupre sent in this photo of Redbill Beach in Bicheno. It was wet about the south and southwest, partly cloudy elsewhere, even sunny in the far northeast. The top temperature was 32 degrees in St Helens. It reached only 16 degrees in Hobart, 27 in Launceston. Yesterday and overnight, the highest rainfall was 22 millimetres at Low Rocky Point. 5 fell in Strawn. And the national satellite sequence shows a long cloud band extending from WA to Tasmania, connecting us with our friends over the ditch. A lingering trough could bring gusty showers to Tasmania tomorrow. Across the country tomorrow, showers in Sydney, Canberra and Cairns, Melbourne 23 and cloudy. Back home, showers mainly about the west, easing in the afternoon, showers developing in the northeast in the evening. Burnie 22 and sunny, 24 in Devonport, mostly sunny in Launceston 28 degrees. In St Helens 26 and a late shower or 2, 25 in Swansea, Orford 24, mostly sunny, Fingal 27. And it'll reach 23 degrees in Hobart, a partly cloudy day ahead. Sunrise will be at 6:15. On coastal waters, west to southwesterly winds of 15 to 25 knots, although north to northwesterly in the morning about the east. Winds reach up to 30 knots at times about the north, the south and lower east. There's a strong wind warning from Low Rocky Point to Wineglass Bay and from Sandy Cape to Cape Portland to Larapuna Eddystone Point. On Tuesday, showers in the northeast extending to the west. On Wednesday, showers about the west, fine elsewhere. And for the rest of the week, fine, but at times overcast. Look forward to a warmer day in the north on Friday. And that's the news for now. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.